a man walked onto the stage. He placed a photograph on Johnny Carson's desk. Johnny looked at it. And everything stopped. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B, NBC Burbank. March 1978. Another Tuesday night. Another monologue. Another 300 people in the audience expecting laughs and celebrity interviews and Doc Severinsen's impossible jackets, and the comfortable rhythm of late-night television. Johnny was mid-joke. Something about the economy. The audience was laughing. Ed McMahon was chuckling in his chair beside the desk, that familiar rumbling laugh that had become part of America's nightly routine. The band was ready for the bumper music. The cameras were rolling smoothly. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then a man stood up from the third row of the audience. He was maybe 55, wearing a worn jacket that had seen better days, his hair graying at the temples. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He just stood, stepped into the aisle, and began walking toward the stage with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Security moved immediately. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward to intercept him. This was protocol. Audience members didn't just walk onto the stage. Not at the Tonight Show. Not anywhere. But something made them pause. Maybe it was the way the man moved, not threatening, not erratic, just purposeful. Maybe it was the look on his face, not angry, not unstable, just profoundly sad. Or maybe it was the small black and white photograph he held carefully in both hands, like it was made of glass. Johnny noticed the commotion. He stopped mid-sentence, his jovial expression fading as he watched this man approaching the stage. Ed leaned forward, confused. The audience fell silent, 300 people suddenly uncertain what they were witnessing. The man reached the stage. He climbed the 3 steps slowly, his knees stiff like climbing hurt. Security was right behind him now, hands reaching to grab his arms. "Wait," Johnny said, his voice cutting through the confusion. He held up one hand toward security. "Just wait a second." The guard stopped. Everyone stopped. The man walked across the stage to Johnny's desk. He didn't say anything. He just carefully, reverently, placed the photograph on the wooden surface in front of Johnny Carson. And then he stepped back. Johnny looked down at the photograph. Cameras were live when an audience member walked on stage and placed an old war photograph on Johnny Carson's desk. Carson looked at it and said, "Ed, stop the band." The photograph was old. Black and white. The edges were worn from being handled too many times over too many years. It showed 5 young men in military fatigues, somewhere in Vietnam, standing in front of a helicopter. They were smiling. That strange, forced smile soldiers learn to make when someone points a camera at them in a war zone. The smile that says we're fine when nothing is fine. Johnny's face went completely white. All color drained from his cheeks. His hand, which had been gesturing during the monologue, lowered slowly to the desk. His fingers touched the edge of the photograph. "Ed," he said quietly, not looking away from the image. "Ed, stop the band." Ed McMahon, who had worked with Johnny for 16 years and knew every tone of his voice, immediately turned to Doc Severinsen. "Doc, hold the music." The band, which had been ready to play, lowered their instruments. The studio went completely silent. Johnny looked up at the man standing beside the stage. "Where did you get this?" The man's voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "You know where I got it, Johnny. You were there when it was taken." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't a bit. This wasn't planned. Something real was happening, and nobody knew what to do. Johnny stood up slowly from his desk. He picked up the photograph, holding it with both hands now, staring at it like it might disappear if he looked away. "What's your name?" Johnny asked. "Robert Chen. You knew me as Bobby. We served together. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. Da Nang. 1968. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 10 years earlier, in a place Johnny Carson never talked about. Ever. Before Johnny Carson was the king of late-night television, before the desk and the monologues and the millions of viewers every night, he was Captain John Carson, United States Navy Reserve, assigned to a communications unit in Da Nang, South Vietnam. It was 1968. Johnny had already been hosting The Tonight Show for 6 years, but he was still in the reserves, and when his unit was called up for a short deployment to provide morale support and entertainment coordination for the troops, he went. No press. No cameras. No publicity. He spent 3 months in Vietnam doing what the Navy asked him to do, and then he came home and never mentioned it again. The official story was vague. Mr. Carson fulfilled his military obligations. That was all anyone knew. Johnny never talked about it in interviews. Never referenced it in monologues. Never brought it up with guests. Those 3 months simply didn't exist in the public narrative of Johnny Carson's life. But they existed for the men who were there with him. Robert Chen had been a 23-year-old Marine corporal assigned to base security at Da Nang when Captain Carson arrived. He'd been assigned to Carson's security detail, keeping the Navy officers safe while he moved around the base coordinating with entertainment units, arranging shows for the troops, doing radio spots to boost morale. They'd become friends. Not in the typical officer enlisted way, but real friends. Johnny would sit with Bobby and the other Marines in the mess hall, trading stories, making them laugh even in that godforsaken place. He'd sneak extra cigarettes from the officers' supply. He'd write letters home for guys whose hands were too shook up from combat to hold a pen steady. One afternoon in April 1968, a photographer had gathered 5 of them together, Johnny and 4 Marines from Bobby's squad, and snapped a picture in front of a helicopter. A moment of forced normalcy in an abnormal place. 2 weeks later, 3 of those Marines were dead. Killed in an ambush outside the wire during a routine patrol. Johnny had been there when they brought the bodies back. He'd helped identify them because their faces were too damaged for anyone else to recognize. He'd written letters to their families. Letters he'd never told anyone about. Letters that said their sons had died bravely, that they'd been good men, that they hadn't suffered. All the lies you tell grieving families because the truth is too terrible. When Johnny came home 3 weeks later, he locked those memories away. He went back to his desk, back to his monologues, back to making America laugh. He never looked back. Never spoke about it. Never let that darkness touch his public life. Until tonight when a photograph from that world appeared on his desk in front of millions of viewers. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny stood behind his desk, still holding the photograph. Robert Chen stood at the edge of the stage, waiting. "You're Bobby Chen," Johnny said quietly. "From Da Nang. 3rd Squad." "Yes, sir." "Why are you here? Why now?" Bobby's voice cracked. "Because I've been trying to find you for 10 years, Johnny. And nobody would let me through. Your people, your producers, your security, they all said you don't see fans, you don't take unscheduled meetings, you don't do this kind of thing. So you bought a ticket to the show. I bought 47 tickets to this show, Johnny. Over 2 years. I sat in that audience 47 times, trying to work up the courage to do what I just did." Tonight was number 48. The audience was completely silent. You could hear the studio lights humming. You could hear someone in the 3rd row trying not to cry. Johnny looked at the photograph again. At the 5 young men smiling in front of a helicopter. At the 3 who never came home. "What do you want from me, Bobby?" "I want you to remember them. Danny Martinez. Kevin O'Brien. James Washington. I know you remember them. I know you wrote to their families. I know because Danny's mother showed me the letter you sent her. She kept it for 10 years, and when she died last year, her daughter gave it to me because she knew we served together." Bobby pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Old. Worn. He held it up. "You wrote, your son Danny was the bravest man I ever met. He saved my life twice, and I never got to thank him. He talked about you every day. He loved you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home. Johnny's jaw clenched. His eyes were wet. You did bring him home, Johnny. You brought all of them home in your heart. But you never let anyone know. You never honored them publicly. You never told anyone what happened over there. It wasn't my place, Johnny said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was just there for 3 months. You guys, you were there for Real. Your war. Not mine. It was your war too, Bobby said firmly. And those 3 men in this picture? They loved you. They trusted you. And they deserve to be remembered. Not just by me. Not just by their families. By everyone. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny set the photograph down on his desk. He looked at the camera, not camera 1 where he usually performed, but camera 3, the one that fed directly to the control room. Stop the tape, he said. The director's voice came through the studio speakers. Johnny, we're live to tape, we can't just... I said stop the tape. Johnny repeated, his voice firm. Stop it right now. We're not airing this. Confusion rippled through the audience. Bobby looked stricken. Johnny, I didn't mean to. We're not airing this. Johnny interrupted. Because I'm going to do it properly. Clear the schedule. Cancel whatever segments we had planned. I need 30 minutes. He turned to his producer, Fred de Cordova, who was standing in the wings looking stunned. Fred, get me 3 chairs. Not the guest chairs. Regular chairs. Bring them out here. Johnny, what are you? Just do it. Fred snapped his fingers at the stage crew. 3 simple chairs were brought out and arranged in a circle on the stage, not in the usual talk show configuration, but something more intimate. More real. Johnny looked at Bobby. You said you've been trying to reach me for 2 years? Yes. Were you alone? Or are there others? Bobby hesitated. There are 7 of us. From the unit. We meet once a month. We've been trying to find you together. Are any of them here tonight? Bobby nodded. 2 of them. In the audience. Get them up here. 2 more men stood from the audience. One was younger, maybe early 40s. The other was older, walking with a cane. They made their way to the stage slowly, uncertain, security parting to let them through. Johnny shook both their hands. What are your names? Thomas Riley, sir. Michael Vega, sir. Stop calling me sir, Johnny said gently. Those days are over. He gestured to the 3 chairs. Sit. All of you. The 3 veterans sat. Johnny pulled his desk chair around and sat with them, forming a small circle right there on the Tonight Show stage. Ed McMahon stayed at the desk, tears streaming down his face. Doc Severinsen and the band watched silently from their platform. The audience didn't move. Tell me, Johnny said to the 3 men. Tell me what happened after I left. Tell me about the guys we lost. Tell me what you've been carrying. And they did. For 30 minutes, on national television, 4 men sat in a circle and talked about Vietnam. About Danny Martinez who drew cartoons in his notebook. About Kevin O'Brien who sang off-key. About James Washington who kept a photograph of his daughter in his helmet. About the war nobody wanted to talk about and the men who never came home. Johnny cried. Openly. The king of late-night television, who made millions laugh every night, sat on his stage and wept for brothers he'd lost 10 years ago. When it was over, Johnny stood and shook each man's hand. Then he picked up the photograph from his desk. This stays with me, he said. And every year on the anniversary of the day they died, I'm going to tell their story. On this show. To remind people. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The episode aired exactly as filmed. No edits. No cuts. Highest ratings of the season. Johnny kept his promise. Every April for the next 14 years, until his final show in 1992, he honored Danny Martinez, Kevin O'Brien, and James Washington. He never joked about it. Never made it light. He just remembered. The photograph sat in a frame on his desk for the rest of his career. And when Johnny retired, he donated it to the Smithsonian with one request: place it where people can see that even comedians carry the weight of war.